Title: The Secrets of the Attic. It was Halloween, Tessa's favorite day of the year. She loved the excitement, the costumes, and the magical feeling in the air. This Halloween was extra special because her parents had mentioned a full moon tonight. As usual, Tessa was thrilled about the candy and couldn't wait to enjoy it after the trick-or-treaters stopped ringing the doorbell. Her parents had gone out to get some last-minute supplies, leaving her with the perfect opportunity to head up to the attic to find her costume for the evening. The attic had always held a certain mystique for Tessa, dark, cluttered, and full of forgotten memories. She climbed the creaky stairs, her heart pounding with anticipation. Once at the top, she spotted the usual cluster of boxes marked Halloween near the small window. She smiled, remembering all the costumes she had worn in years past. But as she drew closer to the boxes, something else caught her eye. Next to the Halloween boxes was an old, peculiar trunk. She had seen it before, a strange black box with a velvet covering labeled Grandma Cora. It was an heirloom, passed down through generations, but her parents never let her look inside, saying it was too old and delicate to handle. However, with no one around, Tessa couldn't resist her curiosity any longer. The trunk felt cool to the touch, the fabric worn smooth with age. Tessa knelt down and opened it, a slight creak breaking the attic's stillness. Inside, she found a jumble of objects, worn-out lace gloves, yellowed letters, and an assortment of books. One particular item stood out, a weathered, leather-bound journal with faded writing on the cover. It looked ancient, even older than anything else in the trunk. The journal bore the name of her ancestor, great-great-grandmother Agnes, a woman Tessa had heard stories about growing up. Her mother had always mentioned how Agnes was rumored to be involved in strange practices, occult rituals that the family rarely discussed. Tessa had always brushed it off as family folklore, but holding Agnes's journal in her hands now made her shiver. Flipping through the brittle pages, Tessa saw strange symbols and passages written in an unfamiliar language. A red bookmark was nestled between two pages near the middle of the book. Hesitant but intrigued, she opened to that spot and began to read aloud. The words felt heavy, ancient, as if they held some kind of power. Suddenly, Tessa felt a sharp pain in her temples. Her vision blurred, and the room seemed to spin. She tried to stand, but felt herself slipping into darkness. The journal fell from her hands as she collapsed to the floor. Hours later, Tessa awoke with a pounding headache. Disoriented, she realized it was now pitch dark outside, and the only light came from the pale full moon shining through the attic window. Her heart raced as she remembered the strange book and the words she had spoken aloud. Had she passed out from exhaustion or something more sinister? She scrambled to her feet, looking for the journal. It had fallen near the trunk, its pages splayed open. But as she bent to pick it up, she noticed something out of place. A cold draft blew through the attic, rustling some of the papers and old clothes. The air felt different, charged with something eerie. She glanced back at the window and froze. There, in the reflection of the glass, was not just her face staring back, but the faint outline of another figure. A shadowy, indistinct form stood just behind her, too vague to recognize, but unmistakably there. Tessa whipped around, her pulse quickening. The attic was empty, or so it seemed. Her breath caught in her throat as she scanned the room, waiting, listening. The silence was deafening, punctuated only by the occasional creak of the house settling. But there was something else now, a low, almost imperceptible whisper. It was as if the very air around her was murmuring words she couldn't quite make out. She backed away from the trunk, her mind racing. What had she done? She needed to get out of there, away from whatever had been awakened by the words she'd read. But as she moved toward the attic door, something caught her foot. She glanced down to see a thin, dark tendril of shadow curling around her ankle, holding her in place. Panic surged through her as she yanked her foot free and stumbled down the stairs. She could feel something behind her, watching, following, though every time she turned, the hallway remained empty. Reaching the safety of the living room, Tessa slammed the door shut, breathing hard. She tried to rationalize what had happened. Maybe it was just her imagination playing tricks on her. Maybe the attic was just cold and drafty, and the reflection had been a trick of the moonlight. But deep down, she knew that wasn't true. The night passed in a tense, sleepless blur. Every sound made Tessa jump, every shadow seemed alive. She couldn't bring herself to go back upstairs, and when her parents finally returned, she decided not to mention what had happened. They wouldn't believe her anyway. But the next night, as she was getting ready for bed, she heard it again, the whisper, soft, insistent, coming from the attic. Tessa froze, her skin crawling. The voice was unmistakable this time, and it was calling her name. Tessa. It echoed through the house, growing louder, more urgent. She wanted to run, to hide, but her legs felt rooted to the spot. Slowly, against her will, she began to move toward the attic stairs. Her heart pounded in her chest as she ascended the steps. The door at the top stood ajar, the faintest glow seeping through the crack. She knew what was waiting for her. She knew that whatever had been unleashed the night before was still there, waiting. As she reached the top, the whispers stopped. The attic was silent once more, save for the soft rustling of the wind outside. But the trunk was open again, and the journal lay on the floor, the red bookmark still in place. Tessa knew she shouldn't. She knew she should leave it alone, burn the book, forget about it. But she couldn't. Something inside her, something deep and dark, wanted to know more. And so, with trembling hands, she picked up the journal again. This time, the shadows didn't wait. They came for her. Tessa felt the icy grip of failure as she stumbled down the stairs, her vision still blurry from the unsettling experience in the attic. She couldn't believe how much time had slipped away. It was Halloween night, and the streets should have been filled with children in costumes, their laughter echoing in the cool air. But now, as she looked at the clock reading 8:05, dread settled over her like a heavy fog. She hastily gathered the bags of candy her parents had left in the cupboard, feeling a pang of disappointment. The neighborhood kids would surely be winding down by now, most parents unwilling to let their little ones stay out too late. "I've missed it," she whispered to herself, the joy of the evening slowly draining from her. Stepping out onto the porch, she sat down with the candy bowl in hand, unsure if anyone would even come at this late hour. Just as she resigned herself to a quiet night, she noticed movement by the picket fence. A young zombie shuffled closer, dragging a plastic bag for candy behind him. Next to him was a boy dressed as Freddy Krueger, his plastic knives glinting under the streetlights. Tessa watched as they hesitated at the gate. Something was wrong. They looked at her, really looked at her, and their expressions changed from excitement to terror. Without a word, both boys bolted, their footsteps echoing down the street as they vanished into the darkness. Puzzled, Tessa stood up, trying to figure out what had just happened. Then she glanced down at herself. She wasn't wearing her planned Alice in Wonderland costume. In fact, she wasn't wearing any costume at all. Her reflection in the porch window showed her face, pale, twisted, and ghastly. It wasn't makeup. Her real face, the one she'd seen in the attic mirror, had returned. The memories of last Halloween flooded back. She had vowed never to make the same mistake again, but something about that book, Priscilla's book, had left her unhinged, just like it had last year. The feeling of something ancient stirring inside her hadn't left. The voice that had whispered to her from those brittle pages seemed louder now, almost as if it had come alive in the night air. Suddenly, the sound of wings flapping caught her attention. She looked up to see two shadowy figures darting across the sky, silhouetted against the full moon. A chill ran down her spine. Her parents had arrived. They landed gracefully in the yard, their brooms gliding silently onto the grass. Tessa's mother, her dark eyes gleaming with excitement, was the first to speak. "How many did you catch?" she asked eagerly. Tessa blinked, still feeling the weight of whatever force had possessed her in the attic. She struggled to answer, the words stuck in her throat. "None," she finally mumbled, the single word hanging heavily in the cool evening air. Her father's eyes narrowed, his voice rising in anger. "None? On Halloween? How could you let them get away?" He slammed a blood-stained axe down onto the porch, making Tessa jump. "You've had all night to bring in your share, and you failed us. Again." Tessa could barely think straight. The voices from the attic still echoed in her head. It wasn't just about catching trick-or-treaters. It was something deeper. Something dark had awakened when she opened that cursed book. She wasn't the same, and her parents could sense it. You drank too much of the potion again, didn't you? Her mother accused, disappointment dripping from her voice. It makes you soft. You've let them all slip through your fingers. I didn't, Tessa whispered, her voice shaking. It was different this time. Something else is happening. Her father sneered, stepping closer. Excuses. Always excuses. You've had 16 years to learn the craft, to make your mark, and still, you fail us. What will you do next year, when it's too late? Tessa backed away from the porch steps, her eyes darting to the shadows where the boys had disappeared. It's not me, she said, her voice firmer now. It's Priscilla. She's still here. The book, there's something in it, something alive. Her mother frowned, her demeanor shifting from anger to concern. The book? You went into the attic again? Tessa, you know better than to meddle with Priscilla's things. But it was too late. The air grew colder, and a gust of wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the faint scent of rot. The night seemed to close in around them, pressing in like a force unseen. Then, from behind them, a voice whispered, "She's right." Tessa froze. The voice was not her mother's, nor her father's. It came from the shadows, low and raspy, like dead leaves scraping across stone. Both her parents turned in alarm, but before they could react, the figure of a woman, tall and gaunt, stepped from the darkness. Her long, flowing dress fluttered in the breeze, her eyes burning with an unnatural fire. It was Priscilla, or what remained of her. You thought you could bury me, hide me away like some forgotten trinket. Priscilla sneered, but I'm part of this family, part of her. You've ignored me for too long. Tessa's mother gasped, her voice trembling. We sealed you away for a reason, Priscilla. You're too dangerous. Dangerous? Priscilla laughed, a chilling sound that sent shivers down Tessa's spine. You have no idea what danger is, but she will. The old witch's bony finger pointed straight at Tessa, who felt the ground tilt beneath her feet as Priscilla's power surged through the air. No, her father shouted, rushing forward, but it was too late. The dark magic swirled around Tessa, encasing her in a whirlwind of power. Her body trembled as the ancient energy of her ancestor took hold. Priscilla's voice echoed through her mind, filling her with knowledge and secrets she couldn't comprehend. You are mine now, Tessa, the voice whispered, and together we will show them what true power looks like. Tessa's vision blurred, the world spinning around her as the last vestiges of her former self slipped away. When she looked up again, her eyes glowed with the same eerie light as Priscilla's. Her parents watched in horror as their daughter transformed before their eyes. Tessa, no, her mother cried, but the girl who stood before them was no longer the daughter they knew. With a chilling smile, Tessa turned to face her family. Next Halloween, she whispered, her voice a haunting echo of Priscilla's, will be different. I'll make sure of it. I'm sorry, Dad. I found 2 old books in the attic, and they distracted me. One was Grandma Priscilla's from 1683, and the other had Grandma Hecate's name. When I read them, I felt strange and fell asleep. When I woke up, it was dark, and my head was spinning. I warned you about the potion, her mother chimed in, as a black cat crossed their path. It's strong. It has Eye of Newt. Tessa's mother had a point, but Tessa shook her head, confused. I've been drinking that brew every Halloween, and it's never affected me like this before, she said, unsettled. Her mother, an old crone with a wicked smile, croaked, Don't worry, we caught plenty of kids for the feast. We've stored them in the graveyard, and tomorrow you can help us move the rest for cold storage. A good nightmare will do wonders. Did you chop off their fingers and toes? Tessa's appetite, normally insatiable on Halloween, had all but disappeared, though her lips twitched at the thought of those delicious snacks. Yes, her mother said, grinning. I knew you'd want something to snack on. She pulled out a black sack and placed it on the porch. Tessa tried to eat one of her favorite treats, a thumb dog wrapped in a bloody rag, but the taste was repulsive. She gagged, spitting out bone fragments and chasing it down with a gulp of her mother's blood brew. Something inside her felt off, deeply wrong. Her father, oblivious, grabbed a slice of flesh and retreated into the house for a snack break, leaving Tessa and her mother alone. Her mother eyed her suspiciously, gnawing on a chocolate eyeball. You're not yourself tonight, Tessa. I've never seen you turn away from your favorite treats. Tessa could only nod weakly. It wasn't the brew. Something happened when I read Great-Grandma Priscilla's book. I I didn't even want to harm the trick-or-treaters who showed up. Her mother's expression hardened, her voice dropping to a hiss. For Satan's sake, don't let your father hear that. You'll bring shame to the family. Letting mortals live, we'd be the laughingstock of the coven. Tessa's hands trembled. It's not just that. When I found the book, I saw something else. Inside the cover, there were words I've never seen before. It was a Bible. Her mother paled at the mention of it, and for the first time that night, true fear flickered in her eyes. "What have you done, Tessa?"